The galaxy was full of monsters, and they all had a ranking. The concord of starborn nations had been around for thousands of years. Hundreds of species lived under its laws, traded under its markets, and fought under its wars. And like all civilizations that grow large enough, the Concord had developed a system to decide who mattered and who did not. They called it the Predator Index. Every species was tested, measured, and placed on a tier based on how dangerous they were. Speed, strength, aggression, natural weapons, sensory ability. The numbers did not lie, and the numbers decided your place at the table. At the very top sat the Vethrak. They were 7 feet tall, covered in thick scaled armor that could stop a blade, and they saw the world through infrared eyes that could track a heartbeat through a wall. Their teeth could crack bone. They had conquered 6 species before they even reached the stars, and they had conquered 4 more after. The Vethrak Dominion held more territory than any other power in the Concord, and their war chief, a massive and ancient warrior named Dominant Sorath, made sure everyone remembered it. Just below them were the Koldari. They were insectoid, tall and thin with dark shells and too many limbs. Alone, a single Koldari was dangerous, but they never fought alone. They moved in perfect synchrony. Hundreds of bodies sharing a single tactical mind through a natural neural link. A Koldari swarm could take apart a fortified position in minutes without a single word spoken between them. Their matriarch, Scythia, was considered the most brilliant military mind in the galaxy. Then came the Brun, massive bear-like creatures who could shrug off plasma fire. Then the Zelkari, winged hunters with venom that dissolved flesh. Then a dozen other species, each one more terrifying than the last, each one proud of the claws and fangs and poisons that evolution had given them. And then, somewhere far down the list, almost forgotten, were the humans. Tier 6, mid-range omnivores, no claws, no venom, no armor, no wings, average speed, below average strength, unremarkable senses. They had soft skin that cut easily, and bones that broke under pressure. They needed to sleep for a third of their lives. They could not survive in extreme heat or extreme cold without wrapping themselves in artificial protection. On paper, they were one of the least impressive species the Concord had ever accepted. Humanity had joined the galactic community about 200 years ago. They had arrived quietly with a small fleet of ships that were functional but not impressive. They had asked politely for membership, accepted their Tier 6 ranking without complaint, and settled on a handful of colonies along the galactic fringe where nobody else wanted to live. Frozen worlds, barren moons, places that the bigger species considered worthless. They traded in medicine. They sold literature and music and art. They offered cultural exchange programs and language courses. They built hospitals on neutral stations and staffed them with doctors who never turned away a patient, regardless of species. They were, by all accounts, pleasant, friendly, harmless, and completely, utterly forgettable. Ambassador Rael Vasquez was humanity's representative to the Concord. She was a small woman in her 50s, with dark hair turning silver at the temples, and calm brown eyes that never seemed to blink fast enough. She attended every summit, every council session, every diplomatic function. She smiled, she nodded, she spoke softly, and every single time someone invited humanity to join a military coalition, or a predator alliance, or a territorial expansion pact, she said the same thing. Thank you, but we must respectfully decline. The other species found this amusing at first, then confusing, then simply boring. The Brun ambassador once joked that humans were the galaxy's houseplants, nice to look at, easy to ignore, and they would die if you forgot to water them. The joke got a big laugh at a diplomatic dinner. Rael, who was seated 3 chairs away, smiled politely and continued eating. It was at the annual Concord Summit on the capital world of Aethys Prime that Dominant Sorath decided to make his feelings about humanity publicly known. The Vethrak Dominion was expanding again. They had claimed 3 new systems in the Outer Rim, and 2 of those systems were uncomfortably close to human frontier colonies. When Rael raised a quiet concern about territorial boundaries, Sorath stood to his full 7-foot height and looked down at her with his glowing infrared eyes. "The shadow dwellers of Earth speak," he said, and his voice rumbled through the chamber like distant thunder. "Tell me, Ambassador, what will you do if we'll take those systems? Write us a poem? Sing us a song? Perhaps offer us a blanket and a warm meal?" The chamber laughed. Even some of the neutral species chuckled. Rael sat very still, her hands folded on the table in front of her. She did not look away from Sorath. She did not flinch. She did not blush or stammer or show any sign of embarrassment. She smiled. "We would prefer to resolve this through dialogue, Dominant Sorath," she said evenly, "but I appreciate your colorful suggestions." Sorath snorted and sat down, satisfied that he had made his point. The summit moved on to other matters, and humanity was forgotten again, as it always was. But one person in the chamber noticed something that day. His name was Kale, and he was a junior Vethrak diplomat. Young by Vethrak standards, barely past his second molting. He had been trained to observe, to read body language across species, to detect fear and weakness and submission in all their alien forms. It was a skill that Vethrak diplomats prized, because knowing when your opponent was afraid told you when to push harder. Kale watched Rael Vasquez during that exchange, and what he saw troubled him. When Sorath had loomed over her, mocking her, threatening her entire species in front of the galactic community, her heart rate had not increased. Her pupils had not dilated. Her hands had not trembled. There was no micro-expression of fear, no flicker of anxiety, no suppressed flight response. He had seen those signs 100 times in 100 species. He knew what fear looked like in every sentient creature the Concord had catalogued. Rael Vasquez was not afraid. What he saw in her eyes instead was something he could not name. It was calm and steady and very, very old. It looked, if he was honest, like the expression of Vethrak Elder War when watching young hatchlings play at fighting, patient and knowing and just slightly sad. Kale filed his observation away and told no one. It was just a curiosity, he told himself. Humans were Tier 6. They were harmless. 3 weeks later, a Vethrak scouting fleet of 14 warships entered the outer boundary of a human frontier system called Svalbard's Reach. Their mission was simple: survey the system, map its resources, and report back so that Sorath could add it to the Dominion's expansion plan. None of the 14 ships ever reported back. There were no distress signals, no emergency beacons, no debris fields, no energy signatures from weapons fire. Nothing. The ships simply flew into human space and vanished, as quietly and completely as if the darkness itself had swallowed them whole. And somewhere on the other side of the galaxy, Ambassador Rael Vasquez sat in her modest office on Aethys Prime, sipping tea and reading a book of poetry. Her assistant informed her about the missing Vethrak ships. She nodded once, turned a page, and said nothing at all. Dominant Sorath had not felt real anger in a long time. He was old, powerful, and feared by half the galaxy. Anger was a luxury for creatures who still had something to prove. But when his intelligence officers told him that 14 Vethrak warships had disappeared inside a human frontier system without a trace, something hot and sharp moved through his chest. Not grief. Vethrak did not mourn soldiers who failed. It was something worse. It was confusion. And for a species that had always known exactly where it stood on the food chain, confusion felt a lot like weakness. He ordered a full battle group to the Svalbard system. 200 warships, heavy cruisers, assault carriers, troop transports, and enough firepower to crack a planet's crust. This was not an investigation. This was a message. Whatever had happened to his scouts? Pirates, a rival species hiding in human space, some freak accident of nature. Sorath would find it, burn it, and remind the galaxy that the Vethrak Dominion did not lose ships without consequence. The fleet arrived at New Svalbard 3 days later. It was a frozen world, the kind of place that made even the cold-blooded Vethrak uncomfortable. Ice covered everything. The atmosphere was thin and bitter, and storms rolled across the surface like gray walls of fury. Scans showed a single settlement, a city of maybe 40,000 humans, built into the rock and ice of a mountain range. No orbital defense platforms, no weapon satellites, no military fleet. Nothing. Sorath opened a broadcast channel and made his demand. Surrender the colony, submit to Vethrak authority, provide information about the missing scouts. Do it now, or face the consequences. The response came from a single human. Her name was Colonel Marin Lind. She appeared on their screens as a woman of average height and build, wearing a plain gray uniform. Her blonde hair was cut short, and her blue eyes were steady and still. She looked like someone who had just been interrupted from something unimportant. "Vethrak Fleet, this is Colonel Lind of the New Svalbard Garrison," she said. Her voice was flat and calm. "You have entered a patient zone. You are being observed. I advise you to turn your ships around and leave this system. You will not be warned again." A patient zone. Sorath had never heard the term. His officers looked at each other in confusion. One of them laughed nervously. Sorath cut the channel and gave the order. "Ground invasion. Take the city. Find answers." 12,000 Vethrak soldiers dropped from orbit in armored landing pods. They hit the frozen surface in perfect formation, their infrared vision cutting through the snow and dark. Each soldier was armed with plasma rifles and wore combat armor that could stop most conventional weapons. They were the most feared ground force in the galaxy. They had taken fortified cities on a dozen worlds. A human settlement of 40,000 civilians would fall in hours. It did not fall in hours. The first wave of soldiers reached the outer edges of the city and found it empty. No people, no resistance, no sound except the wind. They pushed forward, moving through wide streets and low buildings, scanning for heat signatures. The humans had to be hiding underground. It was the obvious move, the coward's move. Then the ground started fighting back. Electromagnetic pulses erupted from devices buried deep in the permafrost. They came in waves, each one stronger than the last, and they tore through Vethrak technology like fire through paper. Helmet displays went dark. Communication systems collapsed into static. Plasma rifles locked up. Their targeting systems scrambled. In the space of 90 seconds, 12,000 of the most advanced soldiers in the galaxy were reduced to blind, deaf, and confused animals stumbling through a blizzard. And that was when the humans appeared. They came from everywhere and nowhere, from tunnels beneath the ice, from hidden doors in buildings that had looked empty, from white camouflage that made them invisible against the snow. They moved in small groups of 4 or 5, fast and quiet, hitting Vethrak squads from angles that should have been impossible, and vanishing before anyone could return fire. They did not fight like predators. There was no charge, no roar, no display of dominance. They fought like something else entirely, something patient and methodical and deeply, horribly efficient. Every attack targeted a specific weakness. Joints in the armor where scales were thinnest, sensor nodes on helmets, the soft tissue behind Vethrak knee plates. They had studied Vethrak anatomy with the precision of surgeons, and they used that knowledge the way a surgeon uses a scalpel. The buildings themselves were weapons. Corridors that looked like hallways were killing grounds with hidden barriers that split Vethrock squads apart. Doors locked behind soldiers, separating them from their units. Floors collapsed into pits lined with shock nets that stunned without killing. The entire city had been designed, from the very beginning, as a trap. Not a hasty defense thrown together in panic, but a calm, patient, carefully engineered system of control. Vethrock soldiers were trained for every form of combat. They had protocols for ambushes, sieges, and guerrilla warfare. But nothing in their training prepared them for an enemy that seemed to be the environment itself. The snow was the enemy. The buildings, the streets, the frozen air, everything worked together, and at the center of it all were the humans, moving like ghosts, striking and vanishing, never staying long enough to be caught. In orbit, things were even worse. The Vethrak fleet had been monitoring the ground invasion when the first systems began to fail. It started small, a navigation error on one ship, a weapons calibration glitch on another. The officers corrected the problems and thought nothing of it. Then more systems failed, then more. Then the failures began to cascade, jumping from ship to ship like a disease. Navigation went first, then weapons, then shields. Then, on 43 ships simultaneously, life support began to stutter. Panic spread through the fleet. Engineers tore open access panels and found nothing wrong with the hardware. The problems were in the software, buried so deep in the operating code that they were almost invisible. Tiny programs, no larger than a grain of sand in the data stream, had been sitting dormant in Vethrak systems for months, maybe years. They had entered through trade networks, through the cultural exchange programs that humans offered so freely, through the medical databases that human doctors shared so generously. The humans had not hacked the Vethrak fleet during the battle. They had hacked it long before the battle was ever planned. One by one, 200 warships went dark. Engines died. Weapons locked. Shields collapsed. The great armada of the Vethrak Dominion hung in orbit above New Svalbard, like dead fish floating in a frozen sea. And then the human ships arrived. They were not warships. They were the same modest trade vessels and medical frigates that the galaxy had always ignored. They docked with the disabled Vethrak cruisers gently, almost politely, and human boarding teams entered through the airlocks wearing medical gear instead of combat armor. They carried first aid kits instead of weapons. They spoke softly. They helped wounded Vethrak soldiers to their feet. They treated burns and broken bones and plasma exposure with quiet, focused skill. On the ground, the same thing was happening. The fighting stopped as suddenly as it had started. Human soldiers emerged from hiding and began collecting Vethrak prisoners. But the word prisoner did not feel right. They were given warm food, clean water, blankets against the cold, medical attention for every injury, no matter how small. The humans were thorough and careful, and impossibly, maddeningly kind. The Concord intelligence community received the reports within hours, and for the first time in living memory, the Great Hall of the Intelligence Council fell completely silent. 200 Vethrak warships, crewed by 60,000 soldiers, supported by the finest military technology in the galaxy, had been neutralized by a species ranked Tier 6. And not a single Vethrak had been killed. Matriarch Cynthia of the Koldari read the report 3 times. She was not a creature given to emotion, but her antenna trembled as she processed the information. She demanded a full briefing. She wanted to know everything, how the humans had done it, when they had prepared, and most importantly, why they had chosen to spare every single Vethrak life. Nobody had an answer for that last question. It did not fit any model of predatory behavior that the Concord had ever seen. On New Svalbard, in a worn and well-lit holding cell, Kale, the young diplomat, sat on a clean bed and stared at the ceiling. A human guard had brought him a blanket when she noticed him shivering. She was a small woman with a scar across her throat, a fresh one, still pink, the kind that comes from a Vethrak claw. She had nearly died, and she brought him a blanket. Kale wrapped it around his shoulders and felt something crack open inside his understanding of the universe. He thought about Rael Vasquez and her patient smile. He thought about the missing scout ships and the silence that followed. He thought about Colonel Lynn's flat voice saying, "You will not be warned again." And he understood, with a cold certainty that settled into his bones like the frost outside, that the humans had not been caught off guard by the Vethrak invasion. They had not scrambled to defend themselves. They had not reacted at all. They had been waiting, quietly, patiently, in the shadows. They had been waiting for the Vethrak to walk into a trap that had been set long before anyone thought to spring it. Kale pulled the blanket tighter, and for the first time in his life, felt afraid of something that had shown him nothing but kindness. The galaxy had not been this afraid since the Bruin expansion wars 4 centuries ago, and even that fear had been simpler. The Bruin were enormous, violent, and obvious. You could see them coming. You could count their ships and measure their weapons and calculate your odds. Fear of the Bruin was the fear of a storm, terrible but understandable. Fear of the humans was something else entirely. It was the fear of the ground beneath your feet, the fear that comes when you realize the floor you have been standing on your entire life might not be solid after all. The Concord of starborn nations called an emergency assembly on Aethys Prime. Every major species sent representatives. The Great Hall was built to hold thousands, and that day it was full. Vethrak warlords stood in their ceremonial armor, their infrared eyes burning with fury and shame. Koldari delegates sat in perfect stillness, their neural links buzzing with shared analysis. Brun chieftains shifted their massive weight from foot to foot, uneasy in a way they could not explain. Zelkari scouts hung from the ceiling beams, their wings folded tight, their venom glands swollen with stress. Everyone wanted answers. Everyone wanted to know how a Tier 6 species had done what no Tier 1 power had ever managed, defeated a full Vethrak armada without losing a single soldier on either side. Dominant Sarath demanded blood. He stood before the assembly and called the human victory a trick, a cheat, a violation of every principle of honorable warfare. He wanted the Concord to authorize a punitive campaign against Earth. He wanted human colonies burned. He wanted their species reclassified as a threat and dealt with accordingly. But the other species were not listening to Sarath anymore. His fleet had been beaten by doctors and traitors. His soldiers had been captured by an enemy that gave them blankets. His credibility was a broken thing, and everyone in the chamber could see it. When the noise finally died down, Ambassador Rael Vasquez stood. She was the smallest person in the room by a considerable margin. She wore the same simple dark suit she always wore. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled back, and her brown eyes moved slowly across the assembly, making contact with every species, every delegate, every pair of alien eyes watching her. The hall went quiet, not out of respect, out of something closer to dread. "Thank you," she said, and her voice carried clearly through the chamber without amplification. She had that quality, the human's strange ability to fill a silence without raising their voice. "I know you have questions. I will answer some of them." She paused, and in that pause, several hundred of the galaxy's most powerful beings held their breath. "You classify species by their physical traits," she began. "Speed, strength, natural weapons, sensory ability. By these measures, humans are unremarkable. We accept that. We have always accepted that. We are not fast. A Vethrak hatchling can outrun an adult human. We are not strong. A Bruin child could break a human's arm without effort. We have no venom, no claws, no armor, no wings. Our senses are average at best. By every metric your predator index measures, We are exactly what you think we are. Soft, slow, fragile creatures who should have been eaten long before we ever learned to make fire. She let that sink in. The assembly was perfectly still. But your index does not measure everything, she continued. It does not measure patience. It does not measure endurance. It does not measure the ability to plan across generations, to absorb loss and keep moving, to watch and learn and wait. She touched a control on her podium, and a holographic display appeared above the assembly. It showed a planet. Blue oceans, green continents, white clouds. Earth. Many species had seen images of it before. It was considered an average world, nothing special. Our home world is what your xenobiologists would classify as a Category 4 death world, Rael said. Not the most extreme, but unique in one particular way. Variety. Earth does not kill you with one thing. It kills you with everything. Extreme heat and extreme cold, sometimes in the same day. Earthquakes that reshape the ground. Volcanoes that bury entire regions. Storms that move faster than most ground vehicles. Diseases that evolve as quickly as the creatures they infect. Predators above and below and beside us at every stage of our development. And most dangerous of all, each other. The hologram changed, showing ancient Earth, vast grasslands, a group of early humans, small and thin and naked under the sun, following a large four-legged animal across an open plain. We did not survive by being the strongest or the fastest, Rael said. We survived by being the most persistent. On our world, we developed a hunting method that no other species in this galaxy has ever independently evolved. We call it persistence hunting. We would choose a prey animal, something bigger than us, faster than us, stronger than us, and we would follow it. Not chase it, follow it. Walking, for hours, for days. The animal would run, and we would walk. It would stop, exhausted, and we would keep coming. It would run again, and we would walk again. We did this until the animal's body broke down, until its muscles failed, until it could not run anymore. And then we would be there, standing over it, barely breathing hard, because we were built to walk forever. Several species had stopped breathing. We applied this principle to everything, Rael said. To science, to medicine, to engineering, to war. We call it the persistence doctrine. We do not rush. We do not attack in anger. We observe, we study, we prepare. We build plans that take decades to mature. And when the time comes, we do not need to be stronger than our opponent. We only need to be more patient. She turned off the hologram and faced the assembly directly. You want to know why we stayed in the shadows for 200 years. You want to know why we accepted a Tier 6 ranking without protest. You want to know why we traded medicine and art and stories instead of building war fleets. Her eyes found Sorath, and for a moment, something passed between them. Not hatred, not mockery, but something that made the ancient Vethrak warlord take half a step backward, without knowing why. We stayed in the shadows, she said, not because we were afraid. We stayed because we were studying you. The words hit the assembly like a physical blow. Delegates shifted in their seats. Communicators buzzed with urgent messages. Somewhere in the Koldari section, Matriarch Scythia's antenna went completely still, which was the Koldari equivalent of screaming. Rael continued, her voice unchanged. For 200 years, every human trade ship that entered your space carried observers. Every medical team that treated your wounded studied your biology. Every cultural exchange program analyzed your psychology, your social structures, your decision-making patterns. Every piece of literature and music and art we shared was chosen to teach us how you responded to beauty, to sorrow, to fear. We know your languages better than your own linguists. We know your military doctrines better than your own generals. We have contingency plans for every species in this Concord. Every single one. She let the silence stretch. It lasted a long, long time. We did not build war fleets because we did not need war fleets, she said. A war fleet is a loud thing. It announces itself. It can be counted and measured and prepared for. We preferred to be quiet. We preferred to be underestimated. And we preferred to make sure that if anyone ever forced us to stop being quiet, the conversation would be very short. Rael stepped back from the podium. She did not answer questions. She did not stay for the debate that erupted after her speech. She walked out of the great hall at the same steady, unhurried pace she always walked, and the delegates parted to let her through without being asked. That evening, Matriarch Scythia requested a private meeting with the human ambassador. They met in a small garden on the station, surrounded by alien flowers that gave off faint blue light. Scythia stood very still, her dark compound eyes studying Rael's face with the intensity of a species that had survived by seeing everything. Your speech was very effective, Scythia said. You told the assembly what you wanted them to hear, but you did not tell them everything. Rael sat on a stone bench and folded her hands. No, she agreed. The Vethrak fleet, Scythia said. You disabled every ship. You captured every soldier. You treated every wound. You killed no one. Her antennae twitched. That was not mercy. That was a demonstration. It was both, Rael said quietly. Scythia considered this. You showed the galaxy that you could defeat the strongest military power without taking a single life. You showed them the depth of your capability by showing them your restraint. She paused, which means what you showed us is not the limit of what you can do. It is the floor. She watched the blue flowers sway in the recycled air. Ambassador Vasquez, Scythia said, and her voice was very careful. What would have happened if you had chosen to kill them? Rael looked up at the matriarch. She held her gaze for a long time. And then she smiled, that same patient, knowing, slightly sad smile that Kale had seen at the summit. And she said nothing at all. Scythia returned to the Koldari delegation that night and issued a single directive to every hive commander, every fleet admiral, every intelligence operative under her authority. The directive was 3 words long, and it was marked with the highest classification the Koldari had. Do not provoke. But across the galaxy, in the war chambers of the Vethrak homeworld, Dominant Sorath was not thinking about caution. He was thinking about revenge. And he was already reaching out to others who shared his fury. Warlords and mercenaries and disgraced commanders from a dozen species, all of them hungry for blood, all of them certain that the humans had simply gotten lucky. Sorath was very sure of one thing. No prey species, no matter how clever, could outsmart the galaxy's true predators twice. He was wrong about that. He was wrong about many things. But he would not learn this for some time, because humans were very, very patient teachers. It took Sorath 4 months to build his coalition, and he considered this fast. He worked in secret, using encrypted channels and dead drops on neutral stations, speaking only to those he trusted, which was a very short list. He reached out to rogue Vethrak warlords, who had long chafed under Concord restrictions. He contacted Brun mercenary clans who fought for profit and cared nothing for politics. He found a disgraced Zelkari hive that had been exiled from the Concord for raiding civilian transports, and was desperate enough to join anyone who promised them a return to power. Together they assembled a fleet of over 2,000 warships in a region of deep space that was far from any Concord patrol route or inhabited system. It was the largest unofficial military force the galaxy had seen in decades, and Sorath looked upon it with the deep satisfaction of a predator who had found his prey's trail. The plan was simple, as all good plans were. They would bypass human frontier space entirely, using uncharted routes through empty sectors, and strike directly at Earth, cut the head off the snake, destroy the human homeworld, scatter their colonies, and prove to the galaxy that cleverness and tricks were no substitute for real power. Without Earth, the humans would lose their nerve center, their command structure, their precious shadow network. They would become what they had always appeared to be, a small, soft, helpless species waiting to be consumed. Kale was there, though not by choice. After his release in the prisoner exchange, he had returned to the Vethrak homeworld and immediately requested an audience with Sorath. He had tried to explain what he had seen on New Svalbard, not the defeat itself, but what the defeat meant. The preparation, the patience, the depth of planning that stretched back decades. He told Sorath that the humans were not lucky. They were something the galaxy had never encountered before, and attacking them again would be a catastrophic mistake. Sorath had listened to Kale's warning with the expression of a predator watching a small animal make noise. Then he had assigned Kale to the Coalition fleet as a diplomatic advisor, which was a polite way of saying he wanted the young diplomat where he could watch him. The fleet departed on a carefully plotted course through empty space. For the first 2 weeks, everything went according to plan. The ships moved in formation, silent and dark, their systems running cold to minimize any detectable signature. Morale was high. The soldiers aboard were hungry for the fight that Sorath had promised them, and the empty void of uncharted space held no distractions. Then, on the 15th day, a scout ship disappeared. It was a small Zelkari fast attack craft, running ahead of the main fleet to scan for hazards. One moment, it was there on the tactical display. The next moment, it was not. No explosion, no distress signal, no energy signature. Just gone, as if space itself had closed around it, like a mouth. Sorath ordered the fleet to hold position while a search team investigated. They found nothing. No debris, no residue, no trace that a ship had ever existed in that location. The search team returned, and Sorath ordered the fleet to continue. It was one ship. Scouts were lost sometimes. It meant nothing. 2 days later, 3 more ships vanished. Same pattern. No warning, no wreckage, no explanation. 3 Brun heavy frigates, each one carrying 500 soldiers, simply stopped existing between one sensor sweep and the next. The Brun mercenary commander, a scarred giant named Dorath, demanded answers. Sorath had none to give. He ordered the fleet to tighten formation and increase sensor coverage. For 5 days, nothing happened, and the tension that had been building in the fleet began to ease. Soldiers started sleeping properly again. Officers stopped jumping at sensor glitches. Sorath allowed himself to believe that whatever had taken those ships was behind them now, left in the empty space they had crossed. Then the navigation errors began. They were tiny, fractions of a degree in course headings, minor discrepancies in star charts, small miscalculations in jump coordinates. Each one was too small to notice on its own, but they added up. Over days and weeks, they compounded, and by the time the fleet's navigators realized something was wrong, the 2,000 ships had drifted significantly off course. They were not heading toward Earth anymore. They were heading deeper into empty space, toward a region that appeared on no official map, a vast stretch of nothing between spiral arms, where stars were rare and help was very far away. Sorath ordered an immediate course correction, but the errors kept appearing. Every time the navigators fixed one problem, 2 more emerged. It was like trying to bail water from a boat that was growing new holes faster than you could plug the old ones. The fleet's AI systems were compromised, infected with something so subtle and so deeply embedded that the engineers could not find it, let alone remove it. And then the sounds began. On ships across the fleet, communication systems started picking up strange transmissions. Faint signals buried in the background noise of space. At first, they sounded like static, but when the communications officers cleaned them up and amplified them, they heard something that made their blood run cold. Old transmissions from Earth, centuries old, drifting through the void like ghosts. Soft melodies played on instruments that no alien species could name. And between the songs, other sounds. Laughter, human laughter, the high, bright sound of children playing. It was psychological warfare of the most elegant and terrifying kind. The humans were not trying to frighten the fleet with threats or displays of power. They were doing something worse. They were reminding 2,000 ships full of warriors that they were being watched by something that was not afraid of them at all. Something that found this entire situation so unthreatening that it could afford to play music while it worked. Morale shattered. Bronze soldiers, who feared nothing that had a physical form, began refusing to sleep. Zelkari scouts reported seeing phantom signals on their sensors, contacts that appeared and disappeared like blinking eyes. Vethrak officers snapped at each other over nothing, their disciplined calm cracking under a pressure they could not name or fight. Kale went to Sorath one last time. He found the Dominant in his command chamber, staring at a tactical display that showed the fleet drifting further and further off course, despite every correction attempt. Kale stood before him and spoke plainly. "They knew," Kale said, "before you sent the first encrypted message, before you contacted the first warlord, before you even decided to do this, they knew. They have been watching us for 200 years, Dominant. They watched you lose your fleet at New Svalbard, and they knew exactly what you would do next, because they have studied you longer than you have studied yourself." Sorath stared at him with burning infrared eyes, but said nothing. "We are not hunting them," Kale said quietly. "They are hunting us. They have been herding this fleet from the moment we left port. Every vanished ship, every navigation error, every piece of music on our comms, it is all part of the same thing. They are walking behind us, Dominant, patiently, steadily, waiting for us to tire." Before Sorath could respond, every screen on every ship in the fleet lit up with the same image. A human face, Colonel Maren Lind. She looked exactly as she had on New Svalbard, calm, steady, unimpressed. She spoke, and her voice came through every speaker on 2,000 warships simultaneously. "Dominant Sorath," she said, "you have been walking for a very long time. Your legs must be tired." She paused, and in that pause, 2,000 crews held their breath. "That is how we hunt. We do not chase, we walk, and we wait for you to fall." The channel closed, and in the same moment, every engine in the coalition fleet died. 2,000 warships, carrying over 1,000,000 soldiers, hung motionless in the emptiest stretch of space in the known galaxy. No engines, no weapons, no navigation, no communications with the outside world. They were adrift, helpless, and utterly alone. For 3 hours, nothing happened. The fleet sat in the dark, and fear did what no weapon could. It took apart the coalition from the inside. Brun soldiers began fighting Zelkari scouts over perceived insults. Vethrak officers turned on each other, blaming and accusing. The alliance that Sorath had built with such care dissolved like ice in warm water. And then, out of the darkness, lights appeared. Not warships, not weapons platforms, not the instruments of destruction that every species in the coalition expected, and in some terrible way hoped for. Hospital ships, cargo haulers, rescue frigates, human vessels painted white and marked with medical symbols, emerging from the void like gentle ghosts. They moved through the disabled fleet slowly, carefully, docking with ships one at a time. Human teams boarded each vessel, carrying food, water, medical supplies, and portable power generators. They treated injuries. They fixed life support systems. They brought light and warmth to ships that had gone cold and dark. They were kind. They were so terribly, impossibly kind. Sorath was the last to be reached. He stood alone in his command chamber when the human boarding team arrived. Colonel Maren Lind, walked through his door without escort, without armor, without a weapon in her hand. She looked up at the 7-foot Vethrak warlord who had sworn to destroy her species, and she waited. "Why?" Sorath asked. His voice was hoarse. His infrared eyes were dim. He looked for the first time in his ancient life like a creature that did not understand the world it lived in. "Why do you not kill us? You could destroy this fleet. You could end the Dominion. Why do you keep us alive?" Maren Lind studied him for a long moment. She was so small compared to him, so soft, so fragile, and yet she stood in front of him as if she were the larger creature, as if size and strength were things she had considered and dismissed long ago. "Because the hunt is not about the kill," she said. "It never was." Sorath stared at her. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. For the first time in his life, the galaxy's greatest predator had nothing to say. Maren nodded once, as if she had expected this, and turned to leave. At the door, she paused and looked back. "Your people will be returned to Vethrak space within the week," she said. "All of them, every ship, every soldier, fed, healed, and unharmed. We ask nothing in return." She left. The door closed behind her. And dominant Sorath, conqueror of worlds, terror of the Concord, the most feared warrior the galaxy had ever produced, sat down heavily on the floor of his command chamber and stared at his claws, those magnificent, terrible claws that could tear through metal and bone, and wondered, for the first time, if they had ever made him strong at all. 10 years passed, and the galaxy changed in ways that no one had predicted. The Vethrak Dominion did not collapse after the humiliation of the Coalition fleet, but it did something that many considered even more remarkable. It changed. The old guard of warlords and conquerors, the generation that had built an empire on the philosophy that strength was the only currency worth holding, gradually lost power, not through violence or revolution, but through a slow, quiet shift in thinking that moved through Vethrak society like water moving through stone. Young Vethrak began asking questions that their parents would never have dared to voice. If strength alone decided worth, then why had the strongest fleet in the galaxy been undone by a species that brought blankets to its prisoners? If killing was the highest purpose of a predator, then what did it mean that the most effective predators anyone had ever seen chose not to kill? Dominant Sorath went into exile. He did not fight it. Those who knew him before the human campaigns said that something had broken inside the old warrior. Not his pride or his spirit, but something deeper, his certainty. He had lived his entire life knowing exactly what the universe was and how it worked, and the humans had shown him that he was wrong, and the quiet, patient way they had done it left him no room to pretend otherwise. He settled on a remote Vethrak colony world and spent his remaining years tending to a garden, which was a thing no Vethrak warlord had ever done before. When asked about it by a visiting journalist, he said only that he was learning to grow things instead of breaking them, and that he wished he had started sooner. Kale rose quickly through the diplomatic ranks. He became the Vethrak ambassador to the Concord within 4 years of the Coalition disaster, making him the youngest Vethrak to ever hold the position. He was also the first Vethrak ambassador to publicly advocate for a formal alliance with humanity, which earned him enemies among the old guard, but respect from nearly everyone else. He carried a small object with him wherever he went, a folded gray blanket, human-made, the same one he had been given in his holding cell on New Svalbard. He kept it in his office, visible to every visitor, and when people asked about it, he told them the story of the woman with the scar on her throat, who had nearly been killed by his people, and who had brought him warmth anyway. The Concord itself changed too. The Predator Index was officially retired 3 years after the human crisis. The Koldari proposed the motion, and it passed with overwhelming support. In its place, the Concord adopted a new system of species evaluation that measured cooperation, adaptability, cultural contribution, and what the drafters awkwardly termed strategic patience. Nobody said it out loud, but everyone knew the new system was essentially a description of humanity, repackaged as a universal standard. And through all of this, humans remained exactly where they had always been. They still lived on the same quiet fringe colonies. They still traded in medicine, literature, and art. They still ran hospitals on neutral stations, and staffed them with doctors who never turned anyone away. They had not claimed a single new system, not built a single warship that anyone could see, not flexed their power in any visible way. If you visited a human colony, you would find the same modest settlements, the same friendly people, the same warm and unremarkable lives that the galaxy had always ignored. Ambassador Rael Vasquez retired quietly, without ceremony, and moved to a small house on a human colony world called New Carey, where she spent her days reading and walking along a rocky coastline that reminded her of a place on Earth she had loved as a child. A new ambassador took her place, a man named Tomas Herrera, tall and thin, with kind eyes, and a voice so soft that delegates sometimes had to lean forward to hear him. If anything, he was even quieter than Rael. The 10th anniversary of what historians had begun calling the Patience Crisis was marked by a galactic summit on Aethys Prime. It was a celebration of peace, which was a strange thing for a galaxy that had spent most of its history celebrating conquest. But the times had changed, and the summit reflected the change. Matriarch Scythia of the Koldari gave the keynote address. She was older now, her dark shell showing the pale lines that came with age in her species. But her mind was as sharp as ever. She stood before the assembly, the same assembly that had trembled with confusion and fear 10 years ago. And she spoke about what the galaxy had learned. We spent millennia building a civilization based on the assumption that the strongest survive, she said. We measured ourselves by our ability to destroy, and we placed those who destroyed best at the top of our hierarchy. The humans did not challenge this assumption with words or arguments. They challenged it by being better at survival than any of us, while refusing to destroy anything at all. They showed us that power without restraint is not strength. It is just noise. The assembly was quiet. Many of the delegates had been present 10 years ago, when Rael Vasquez had pulled back the curtain on humanity's true nature. The memory still carried weight. Kale spoke next. He walked to the podium, carrying himself with a confidence that would have been unthinkable for a young Vethrak diplomat a decade ago. Not the aggressive confidence of his species' old ways, but something calmer and more grounded. I was a prisoner of the humans, he said simply. I was captured during the Battle of New Svalbard. I was held in a clean room with good food and warm light, and I was treated with a respect that I had done nothing to earn. I want to tell you about one moment from that experience. He paused, and the assembly leaned forward. On the second night of my captivity, I was cold. The human buildings were warm by their standards, but Vethrak blood runs hot, and the temperature was not enough. A guard noticed. She was a young woman, a soldier. She had fought in the battle that day. I learned later that a Vethrak claw had caught her across the throat during the fighting, and she had nearly bled to death in the snow before a medic reached her. She still had the scar when she came to my cell that night. He touched his own throat, mirroring the location of the wound. She brought me a blanket, he said. She saw that I was shivering, and she went and found a blanket and brought it to me. She did not say anything. She just handed it to me, nodded once, and left. That was all. A small thing, an ordinary thing, and it changed the entire course of my life. He looked out at the assembly, and his infrared eyes were bright. We ranked ourselves by who could kill the fastest, he said. We built our entire civilization on the idea that the ultimate predator was the one who could end a life with the greatest speed and efficiency. The humans taught me that we were wrong. The true apex predator is not the one who kills best. It is the one who chooses when to kill and whether to kill at all. The power to destroy means nothing if it is your only option. The power to show mercy when you have every right and every ability to be merciless. That is the power that changes worlds. The applause lasted a long time. When it finally faded, a young journalist from a newly contacted species, a small, nervous creature with wide golden eyes and translucent wings, approached Tomas Herrera during the reception that followed. The species had only joined the Concord 2 years ago, and everything about the galactic community was still new and overwhelming to them. The journalist had been assigned to cover the summit, and they had one question that their editors wanted answered above all others. "Ambassador Herrera," the journalist said, holding up a recording device with trembling hands, "your species has demonstrated capabilities that suggest you could be the dominant power in this galaxy. You have the technology, the intelligence, and the strategic depth to control vast territories and shape the Concord to your will. Why do you choose to stay on the fringes? Why do humans stay in the shadows?" Tomas looked at the young journalist for a long time. He had a habit of thinking before he spoke, of giving questions the weight they deserved. The silence stretched, but it was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of someone taking something seriously. "Because the shadows are where you watch," he said at last. "And when you watch long enough, you learn to love what you see." He gestured toward the reception hall, where hundreds of species mingled and talked and laughed together. Vethrak and Koldari and Brun and Zelkari and dozens of others, all sharing the same space, without violence, without fear. "Look at this. Look at what exists here. This is worth more than any territory we could claim or any power we could hold. We do not want to rule the galaxy. We want to make sure it survives." The journalist stared at him, then looked down at the recording device, then back up. "That is a very unusual philosophy for a predator species," they said. Tomas smiled. It was the same smile that Rael Vasquez used to wear. Patient, knowing, warm. "We are a very unusual species," he said gently. "Far away from Aethys Prime, far from any trade route, or diplomatic station, or charted system, deep in the empty space between spiral arms, where the stars thinned out and the darkness was absolute, a station hung in the void. It was enormous, larger than most cities, but it emitted no light, no energy signature, no signal of any kind. From the outside, it was invisible. From the inside, it was the busiest place in the galaxy. Thousands of humans worked there in shifts that ran around the clock. Analysts monitored communication networks across the Concord, tracking patterns in trade, politics, and military movements. Linguists studied new dialects and cultural shifts in real time. Psychologists built and updated behavioral models for every species in the galaxy. Engineers maintained the vast web of observation systems, the hidden sensors, the dormant software, the ghost networks embedded in trade ships and medical stations and cultural exchange programs, that gave humanity its quiet, invisible awareness of everything that happened in the galaxy around them. This was humanity's true nerve center. Not Earth, which was a homeworld and a symbol. Not the fringe colonies, which were homes and communities. This was the place where the long watch happened, where the patience that defined the species was practiced at its highest level. On a display wall near the central operations floor, a new alert blinked. Automated sensors at the galaxy's edge had detected something. Energy signatures of a kind that had never been recorded before, moving in patterns that suggested intelligence and purpose. A previously unknown species emerging from the space between galaxies. Their approach vector was direct. Their communication signals, when analyzed, carried patterns that the behavioral models flagged as aggressive. Something new was coming. Something unknown. Something that might be a friend, or might be the kind of threat that the galaxy had never faced before. A senior analyst named Davi Costa leaned back in her chair and studied the alert. She was 60 years old, gray-haired, and she had spent her entire career in this station, watching the galaxy from the shadows. She had seen crises come and go. She had watched the Vethrak campaigns unfold in real time on these same displays. She had tracked Sorath's coalition fleet from the moment the first encrypted message was sent, and she had helped coordinate the patient, invisible operation that brought 2,000 warships to a halt without a single shot fired. She looked at the new alert, considered it carefully, and opened a fresh file. She labeled it with the date and the coordinates of the contact point. Then she poured herself a cup of coffee, took a long sip, and began to read. There was no panic, no alarm, no rush to judgment. There was only the quiet, steady attention of a species that had learned, over millions of years of evolution on a world that tried to kill them every single day, that the best response to the unknown was not to strike first or run away. It was to watch, to learn, to wait, and to be ready. The long watch continued. It always did.